Welcome to another episode of UAE School Leaders with your host, Mohsin. Please make sure you subscribe and show your support. In today's episode, we have Mr. Daniel, Miss Catherine, and Miss Dalia. We will be discussing what is inclusion, what schools should do to be more inclusive during distance learning, what support can schools provide to parents whose child is a student of determination, how can schools and parents work together in order to create an inclusive distance learning environment. Inclusion is a basic right of every child. It is when we have removed all barriers, discrimination, and intolerance. I believe every child matters and has a right to an outstanding education. So let me start with Mr. Daniel. What is inclusion and what should schools do to be more inclusive during this distance learning period?
Inclusion can involve lots of things. Typically, we know different types of diagnosis, such as dyslexia or attention deficit, or a whole range of sort of different needs, and how can we meet those needs in the same setting as neurotypical or cognitive typical students and so forth. That's the sort of traditional understanding of it. And I think there is a sort of deeper, more profound, meaningful understanding of what inclusion is, and that is about belonging. A space where all children can feel like they belong and they feel like they can participate. The trick for us as teachers is to try and enable that and facilitate that in a way that doesn't cause us more stress and anxiety and cause us time, and indeed for school leaders need to be thinking about cost as well. So how to do that is actually where the difficulty lies. I think the aspiration, well, anyone could have an aspiration for anything, frankly. Love to be inclusive, but actually how to do it is where all the tips and tricks lie. You asked a second question about how to do that now. I think by definition, lockdown by definition is pretty much the opposite of inclusion, right? We're all isolated. We're not belonging to a group, but rather we're all excluded from each other, and we're excluding each other. We're keeping each other at distance. But I think the question about personalizing is something that I have seen certainly in British and European and American schools happening in lots of interesting ways. So there's two broad stroke reactions that I have seen. I'm sorry if this is a bit too broad stroke. One being that schools now have a little bit more sort of time and distance to reflect on the different individual needs of children in their classes, and therefore they can be slightly more personalized. They're doing slightly less in terms of quantity and being able to focus more on the quality of the output and being able to personalize learning to meet a range of different individual needs. And then there's another type of reaction, which has been to, well, we just need to be churning out worksheets, right? And so we're almost like a conveyor belt of producing and producing. We want students to be doing things. And we think that the more that they're doing, the more that they're actually learning, which of course isn't true in reality. Doing doesn't equal learning necessarily. So let me try and bring that to a very specific practical element. I think there's an opportunity for schools to think about how different types of learners in the class may meet this particular task at home. I think there is some very basic questions about levels of processing and understanding, levels of what they're able to output. So, for example, one student may find writing easier, but another may find doing an audio output to be able to demonstrate the fact that they understood it to be easier. And actually now, more than ever, there is an opportunity to do that.
What is inclusion? I found that I do a lot of talks on inclusion, and pretty much I attend a lot of talks. And very usually people talk about what inclusion is in terms of the models and how it's implemented. We very often forget to take a step back and think about what is inclusion in terms of society as a whole. And I often start with the question of what percentage of kids do you think in the UAE have been identified as having individual needs, whether that's a severe to profound need or a really manageable need. And almost always the answer is way off. Even when I'm talking to teams of head practitioners, teams of principals, the answers are you can get anywhere from 40% all the way down to 2%. So it's huge variation. And then the actual number in Dubai particularly is anywhere between 5 and 6%. But then I go on to ask the question, what percentage of those 5 to 6% of kids do you think will get meaningful employment when they leave school? And that's a statistic that hasn't been analysed here. And I would guess it's very low. In Europe, it's fewer than 30%. And if you think about it, that's fewer than 3 in every 10 kids who have a diagnosed need will get a job when they leave school. So when I think about inclusion, I think that it's got to be this global picture of inclusion, not just in school, but when they go to university, when they go to try and find a meaningful post in society. That's what inclusion is. And then you look at us as practitioners in the schools, how can we ensure that that's happening for each individual child?
Great, thank you so much. And Dalia, same with you. What should schools do to be more inclusive in this distance learning period?
Well, as Daniel said and Ms. Catherine said, it's definitely touching upon community and sense of belonging and identifying ways in which we can communicate. We are social beings. And as Daniel said earlier, in a world of social distancing, how are we bringing that all together virtually? How can we make the human connection? How can we inspire each other? How can we promote intellectuality as well as emotionality and spirituality, finding that we all have purpose? So how do we fine-tune that into a model that is all virtual? I like what Daniel said earlier, as well as Catherine, in terms of how do we identify the needs of each individual child, and how do we promote the skills that are essential for their generation. All of these skills are very important for them to master. So as a child who is nonverbal, how can we be creative and promote their verbal skills? We can use emojis, we can use very creative and innovative ways to get them to communicate with their peers. And so that strengthens the quality of life and the provision in the school.
There are alternative ways. Like, we're not stuck to everything has to be pen, paper, written. They have to produce an assignment or a piece of work. I think this move has really revolutionized how teachers are accepting presentation of understanding or knowledge. And I think it's been brilliant.
Yes, and to also touch up on that, the assistive devices that are being utilized today, speech to text, how are we enabling, like Daniel said earlier, if a child has mastered a curriculum standard, are we assessing the child on their written skills, or are we assessing the child on their full capability to produce answers? And then how do we navigate through that and actually use the skills and the tool sets that we have virtually to ensure that we reduce the levels of frustration and we empower our children and all members of society to become our highest potential, all of us? How do we tap into that talent, that skill set, that interest, and make it more meaningful for all of us?
Great. Thank you so much. So, Catherine, what support can schools provide to parents whose child is a student of determination?
This is probably one of the top priorities, one or two top priorities of schools, I think, for the last maybe 4 or 5 weeks. Once the schools started getting a handle on how to run online provision, we then started looking at who do we need to support here. In a way, the parent has kind of become the child's teacher to an extent. They're that medium through which we act. And it's a huge thing to support their well-being. And that's been across all schools I'm talking to. That's really a priority. The KHDA released a document yesterday outlining not new, but kind of just crystallizing procedures for online provision for students of determination. And the biggest focus in there was prioritizing parents, ensuring their well-being and supporting them. We have been doing lots of webinars, seminars, engaging parents one-to-one. We send out certificates of appreciation to parents as well, which has been having a profound effect. Something as simple as a piece of paper that says, "Thank you for doing an awesome job," is sometimes all you need to keep going in a day where you might be struggling. Particularly with our students who have really high needs. I think it's very important that schools make parents aware of the different avenues of support that are available to them, particularly our lower income families who may not be aware of them. We have huge numbers of families who simply don't know how to access the services that are there. CDA are offering loads of services. There are like outstanding centres offering services for free, doing webinars, parent support groups, and it's up to us as the schools to make sure that our parents know that they're available and to engage with our parents ourselves. As heads of inclusion and leaders, we need to be contacting them and saying, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" Asking them the basic questions.
Great, thank you so much. So, Mr. Daniel, same to you. What support can schools provide to parents whose child is a student of determination?
I completely agree with what Catherine says. The other day, I was on a panel discussion with the Westminster Forum. It's a British Parliament question and answer session for government. And somebody asked the question, well, should we be emphasizing STEM at the moment, science and technology and English and maths? And I was like, maybe let's just prioritize mental health as a starting point. We're at a major psychological crisis that we are experiencing, and a lot of it we're not completely and utterly awake to be honest. We're going to realize more about the impact of this in the next year or two. We can't really predict how it's going to be affecting children in the longer term because we've never been through things like this before. But I think that we are confident that it is impacting children, and I think that has to be priority number one. The longest term impact on children's education and their development is going to be their mental health. And so, for example, if we've tried to, so let me give a practical example of this. If we've been unawake and negligent a bit in not sort of asking the right questions around children's mental health and noticing how, let's say, anxious or stressful they may be, but rather we've been pushing them to develop their handwriting and do extra maths and all of these sorts of things, then that can have a longer term negative impact on their handwriting and their maths and various other sorts of things that we really want them to sort of develop. And exactly how and what the mechanics will be, we're not really certain, but let's just assume that it will be. And therefore, there is only so much that teachers can do because, not really qualified to be mental health workers, right? But also, we can't necessarily go and do home visits and I completely agree with Catherine about calling home and saying how you doing, and also assuming that there's firstly asking the student how are they doing, and then secondly is asking the parent how and giving them a well done. Let's assume a couple of things, right? That as a parent of two, just about to be 3 children, it's quite tough being at home with young children. So now let's imagine that you're at home with children who have additional needs of different sorts, who already have potentially negative views of learning, who don't think they're very good at learning, right? It makes it even harder. And there are some students, I know, for example, students who are thriving being at home because they may be on the autistic spectrum and they just love not having to confront other people, and then there are some others who are having exact opposite effect. So there is a range So I don't have a huge amount to offer other than what Catherine was saying about supporting parents and indeed the children. And let me therefore just add one additional element, which is focusing on the learning that is enjoyable and that is doable. I think one of the keys to good differentiation, and we talk about differentiation or personalized learning, is actually, especially for children as determination, as you refer to it in the UAE, is doing something which really speaks to them as an individual. So, for example, my son had been asked to do something by his school, and normally I completely encourage that, but he was hating the idea of doing it. He just didn't want to do it. But he loves space. So instead, we decided to do, instead of a story or something he had to write, we decided to do a PowerPoint story on PowerPoint, that he could choose the pictures he wanted and write things that he really wanted to do and create a story around that. So using a framework that works for him and doing something that really engages him instead of writing a story about going to a forest or something. Now, I'm not trying to negate the school, and I'm simply saying harness the interests of the children. And this is a great opportunity to do it, especially at their home, wanting to do their things anyway. Choose the subjects that they want to do.
Yeah, I think it's adding to that, it's really important to be so mindful that the home is a wealth of learning opportunities. And for students of determination particularly, we need to adapt the curriculum. It's not necessarily about the achieving curricular expectations as we would in our bricks and mortar schools. We have to shift that. We have to be realistic about what parents can do. Like, I have parents who are saying, they want me to do advanced calculus and I can barely add double digits. And I say, well, most of us can't do advanced calculus. That's okay. And it's understanding those expectations and what they can do at home and modifying the curriculum in a very practical way, adapting your curricular plans, adapting your IEP, and then adapting your data expectations as a school in response to that. So it's kind of, you've got to change the whole thing, but making it actually accessible to them in the home and fun.
In addition to that, what I really have been advocating to my parents is focus on the bonds with your child. Focus on the achievements and celebrate them. And in addition to that, make sure you're taking on a team-based approach. You have so many specialists out there as well that are international. The whole world has come together virtually in terms of speech pathologists, psychologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. All of these specialists come with a great skill set to support children in their learning journey. I like what you guys have said in terms of looking at the curriculum and modifying that. So how are the parents involved in that process? Like Catherine has said, tapping into parents' potential and understanding what they're able to do. Are they working parents? Are they focusing on other children inside of the household? What are they actually capable of doing? And how can they do it in a way that supports the bonding between them, between their caregivers here in the UAE as well? We have nannies and other fathers and mothers and siblings, older siblings as well. How can they all support the facilitation of learning and the key strategies that supports them in, like you guys have said, and enjoying their learning process? And how can we tap into the assessments? Are they enjoying it? What kind of assessment strategies can we put in place? As well as, like Daniel said, the interest. What kind of choice boards can we put together in the timetable that promotes consistency and routine and reinforcement? And again, the training in the workshops. If a parent doesn't know the calculus, yes, okay, there's a lot to work around that, of course, but what are the essential elements, that skill sets that the child needs to work on? Maybe it's best to bake a cake. and to enjoy that experience with your family, as well as maybe reading a book together on the couch and modeling the learning objective for that child and ensuring that they are working together in a way that supports family, unity, community, and then celebrating that. How can the school take that moment and promote it within their school community?
Dalia, what tips do you have for parents to help them support their child at home?
How do we empower parents to be the child's number one advocates? They love their children. They want to see the best in their children. So how can we get parent voice within the school and to allow others to hear it and to celebrate amongst each other to create an inclusive community?
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Daniel, any tips do you have for parents to support their child?
Okay, so how about the following? One thing to avoid and 3 things to do.
Great.
Okay. One thing to avoid, task completion. I'm guilty of this. My child is struggling to do his Lego and build it. And what I'll say is, okay, give it here, and then I'll finish it for him. That's task completion. And that's a very fundamental difference between a teacher and a parent. And so the first thing that a parent should do is to step back and allow them to struggle a bit. That's the first thing. Avoid task completion. And then the 3 things to do. One is very specific praise. I'm also, as a parent, guilty of this. I'll just say, oh, well done, that's fantastic. And actually, I haven't been specific in saying, I really love the way that you wrote that letter. It was fantastic. I enjoyed the sharpness at the top or something. So be specific in praise. Can go a long way for children's education. Number 2 is as best as possible, and it is tough. But in the end, it's easier for parents and it's easier for children the more they can stick to some kind of routine. So even if they're doing, let's say, half an hour learning a day instead of 10 hours learning a day, let's try and do it in a similar type structure, in the same sort of a place, in the same sort of a way, so it's predictable. Most children thrive off predictability, that they know what we're doing tomorrow. And with that routine, it's beneficial to ask the children to construct their own routine and to co-construct it with them. And the third thing is to, as best as possible, try and promote independence. All forms of independence, this is linking to what both Dalia and Catherine was saying before about education is more than, just subjects. But all promotion of independence is positive, be it helping at home, be it whatever it is. And the parents can ask themselves, is this helping promote their independence? So, for example, they're at home more than they're at home more than ever. So ordinarily, I might not ask my 4-year-old to take his own dishes to the dishwasher, as an example. But actually, since we're at home, and we're at home quite a lot, and we're constantly churning out dishes, and then this is an opportunity to help promote further independence. That's an example of what I mean. And so there's lots of opportunity for promoting all different types of independence. And really, there's another word for that, which is about helping them grow up. And the advantage of sending them to school is that they're sort of free to explore the world in a sort of contained environment, but they're learning for themselves. So the idea of promoting independence is let them find ways of doing things, and with specific encouragement, which is what the first point was, is to help drive that forward. So avoid task completion, be specific in praise, as much routine as possible, and promoting independence as much as possible.
The counsellor in me would come out, and I would say that it's really important that parents take time to reflect on themselves and know that it's okay not to have done everything, or it's okay to be angry or upset or scared or fearful, and to allow those feelings to be part of your day, because they're unavoidable a lot of the time. And where possible or where appropriate, to talk to your child about those feelings and actually verbalize and say, I'm getting frustrated now because we haven't managed to complete this, and I need to take a break. And take breaks and set time for yourself. Very often we're in 1 or 2 bed houses or apartments and everybody's together. Take space where you can go on your own as a parent and just decompress and chill out. And that's okay. And know it's okay to need to get away every so often.
Great. Thank you so much. Finally, Mr. Daniel, how can schools and parents work together during this distance learning period to create a much more of an inclusive environment?
I think effective communication. There's one of the dangers with in the world of special educational needs is you can end up having very big files of information around children. There are so long, and what we end up losing is just the 1 or 2 or 3 key most salient important points. So some top tips for effective communication is don't have long conversations, have short ones and keep them to the point. Number 2 is try and focus in on 1 or 2 things always, not a long list of 30. And it could be that the school's been very clever and come up with 30 different ways of, supporting this particular child. But actually, it doesn't translate very well either for teachers or individual or parents. So what we need is just 1 or 2 key things to be focusing in on at the moment. Number 3 is for teachers and schools and home to be realistic around targets and rewards and what we can be focusing on at the moment. So, we'll take it week by week or day by day. What can we achieve today? And feel positive about achieving stuff and being okay when we don't. I really love Catherine's point about that. That was really important. Taking care of parents' mental health is a big priority here. And something that we haven't said, which is taking care of teachers' mental health too. Now, somehow and for some reason, it gets lost in the equation a lot. When we start talking about mental health and well-being, we usually talk about children and we talk about possibly homes. We don't talk about teachers, and teachers have their own well-being to take care of right now as well. So I think what would be realistic is to have regular short communication between home and teachers, and to have very focused and specific and useful stuff, which is positive, praising, specific, and mutually supportive. And I think beginning the conversation by acknowledging, this is tough. It is. And for a teacher to say, it's tough for me too. Not to lose that deep sense of humanity and care that we can have for each other, I think.
I look at it from kind of a managerial perspective. I look at it almost as you would a production line. So in terms of we're putting an input of education and support, and our output is improved outcomes for our kids. So if you were on a production line, you'd have a continuous feedback loop going. And I think we should have that for each student in our care, where you have your teachers, your parents, heads of inclusion. Everyone is trial and erroring at the moment. Nobody's got the right answer. There is no model to work on at the moment. We're all literally sailing in a boat in the dark, trying to find our way to what will eventually be a good outcome. So I think that consistent feedback where you get everyone involved. So your parents are trialing things. They're feeding back to you. This worked, this didn't work. They're telling the teacher is telling the head of inclusion. The head of inclusion then feeds back up the pyramid to the senior leadership team. This is working, this isn't working. Perhaps we could change this as a school. Perhaps we could adopt a good approach as a school and have that consistent trial and error with the real understanding that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to do something completely wrong, as long as you recognize it and then build from it. So yeah, those kind of feedback loops, I think, they're really paramount.
I highly recommend Epstein's 6 parent partnership tips, especially in the areas of parenting, supporting nutrition and health, as well as allowing opportunities for volunteering, decision making, especially what Daniel said earlier about communication and the collaboration between parents as well. What kind of support network do they have and can they tap into? There are lots of channels in which they can go into that. And how is the school supporting that? Do parents have access to the governing board, the parent-teacher association, and how are they able to express positive attitudes as well as frustrations, and how are they supporting each other in a way that supports growth and community, like what we've discussed in the beginning of this discussion. What is inclusion, and how do we make that possible in each of our members in our society?
So every Monday, we are hosting a forum for inclusion leaders across the Emirates, and we've got people coming from Singapore, Hong Kong. And it's an open forum where people share their ideas, share their practice, have some discussion. We do presentations about what's working. So please do share the link. We'll send it through and let anyone who you think would benefit from that know. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please make sure you share this video, hit the like and subscribe button. And until next time, goodbye.